Good evening. This is Eric Conti, Superintendent of Schools, here for our third installment of Thursday Night Must-See TV on Burlington's BCAT regarding the fall reopening of schools. Before we get started, I just want to thank Robert Paris and Jen Dodge from BCAT for all their work organizing these shows. So Robert and Jen, thank you very much. Tonight our focus is going to be on some operational questions that people have been asking. We're going to be joined by our Director of Operations, Bob Cunha, and also with some feedback we've received, Patrick Larkin will be monitoring the Facebook page and we'll be answering questions as they come. And if we have time at the end, we'll answer some of the questions live. I also wanted to get Patrick off of camera because the feedback was for me to talk less and for Patrick to talk more in the future. So I was a little bit jealous of his ratings. So Robert, if you could put up the slide for me, please. We'll get going. Again, next slide. Again, wanted to start each week with our guiding principles because we are really using our guiding principles in a lot of the decisions that we're making. I don't need to read through them, but if people review the slideshow after the fact, I just want them to know that really our starting point through this whole process has been the guiding principles, and because we knew we're not going to be able to please everyone as we get through this. So next slide, Robert. So again, the first two slides are really a restatement of our guiding principles, and every Thursday we're going to be starting our presentation with those. Robert, the next slide. Again, a bit of a review. The state released their initial guidelines on June 25th, and the first step was a feasibility study. We had to look at three options: a full in-person return, a hybrid in-person return, which paired up with a remote learning, and then a full remote option. And then the state guidance was for us to focus on the feasibility of having some form of return into schools, having children back in schools. And that's really what we've been doing. We turned in those three plans on July 31st. That was the deadline, so we submitted the three plans to the state. The state is in the process of evaluating them, and we were told today on a call that we should be getting the feedback from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on our specific plans in Burlington by 5 p.m. Tomorrow. So we may need to make some adjustments, but the state is going to give us feedback on all of the work in regards to our feasibility study. Next slide, Robert. Since our last meeting, we've been working on with our district working group, and that was based on the 10 readiness principles from the Ariadne group, and we went over those 10 principles last week. We had 60 people participate, and they were representative of parents, teachers, and staff in the community. Our first meeting was on Tuesday night. We have another meeting tonight after this BCAT presentation, and we're going to be continuing to work with this district working group moving forward. We're not limiting participation, but we're creating some structure in which people can join. So if you're still interested, the work is not going to end. We're going to continue to have these conversations, and we're going to need to have these conversations even after the school year starts. So we're going to be having, if you're interested in some of the areas, and the areas will be evolving, please make sure you let us know, and we'll put you on a committee. Our intention is to share the feedback from these two sessions, again with the school committee, prior to their decision. In terms of the decision that they need to make is the mode of school delivery in the fall, and that decision will be made on Monday, August 10th. So that's Monday night that we have a school committee scheduled where that decision is going to take place. So the school committee will get the feedback probably Friday after the two meetings this week, and then they can incorporate that feedback into their decision making. And again, we're going to continue to meet weekly, again, even after the school committee makes their decision, to work our way through the principles. So what are those principles? Next slide, Robert. Again, these are our readiness groups. We have 5 groups that we've been dividing people into. Group 1, again, the principles that we combined under Group 1, of which I'm the facilitator, are leadership and culture and risk stratification and prevention. Group 2, Barbara Conley, our nurse leader, and Mary Hood, our director of special ed, are looking at testing and tracing, screening and triage, masks and PPE. Group 3, Bob Cunha, our guest tonight, is looking at space layout and air quality, hygiene, that's personal and space, and density and distance. Group 4 are the school principals. They're looking at cohorting and scheduling, and we have representation from the preschool, elementary, middle, and high school in Group 4. In Group 5, Patrick and Dennis Milano are facilitating conversations about what remote learning is, and we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of tonight. But I just want to begin where we're going to end. Is the remote learning that we're talking about is any learning that takes place outside of our school buildings, and we are not talking about the remote learning that people experienced in the spring. We're calling it the same thing, but the experience is meant to be very different. Tonight's conversation is going to be focused on Group 3. As we said, Bob Cunha is here. Next Thursday, we're going to be joined by Dennis Villano and Patrick. We'll be talking about remote learning and educational technology. And then on the following Thursday, we're going to be joined by Barbara Conley to talk about some of the health protocols and discussing some of what we're expecting parents to do prior to their children coming to school. So a little preview of what's to come. Next slide, Robert. Again, I just wanted to graphically show where we are. Tonight's conversation is going to be largely about operations. I do want to just take a second to thank our operational staff, again, under the direction of Bob Cunha. They've been in the buildings all summer. They've been working really hard. Our custodial crews are busy cleaning the buildings, and the buildings are beginning to take shape, as they always do. Our maintenance staff has been doing a lot of construction and making sure all the windows work, fixing screens, building walls, doing all the maintenance that's required in the buildings, and again, been working really hard. And our clerical staff has been really trying to be as flexible as possible, answering questions, and going through all the human resource processes that happen in schools during the summer. Summer are actually a very busy time for schools, even though the kids aren't here, because we have a very limited window in which to do all the work to prepare for the opening of a regular fall. To prepare for this fall, it even feels more hectic than usual. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and he's going to take you through some slides that are going to explain some of what we're planning to do in his principal areas. So thank you.
Again, thank you, Dr. Conti. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Bob Cunha. I'm the Director of Operations here at the school department. I also would like to echo what Dr. Conti had just mentioned, thanking the custodial staff, the clerical staff, and of course the maintenance staff for all of their hard work in maintaining and preparing the buildings, getting us ready for a return to school. A lot of work is going into it, so again, there's not enough thanks for them. Robert, next slide, please. I'm going to use the readiness principles as the layout for tonight's conversation. I'm focused on tasked with 3 principles. So as I go through them, I'm going to explain what each one is, and then we're going to use these for our conversation tonight. As for example, principle number 5, the overall category deals with the space layout and the air quality in our buildings. A quick overview of that, 5.1 is to prioritize the ventilation, filtration, supplemental air cleaning, and regularly verifying HVAC system performance. 5.2 looks at identifying and vetting additional spaces within the buildings. And 5.3 looks at de-densifying hallways and bathrooms. So Robert, if you could go to the next slide, please. Principle 5.1, space layout and air quality. The focus on this is ventilation in our classrooms. So we will ventilate as much as possible with outside air. There's a couple of ways we can do that. Number 1 is to open the dampers on our mechanical equipment, and I will explain that further. But when our mechanical equipment is running, we want to bring in as much outside air as possible. The second way to do that is to open up windows and doors as much as possible. Additional things to look at for us would be consider changing air filters to a higher MERV rating. MERV rating means how much filtration we can get out of these filters. And additionally, in this principle, we would look at to evaluate our HVAC system. I have noted here that we have contracted a third-party engineering firm to evaluate our equipment in our schools. While we do have in-house staff that looks and performs this maintenance task, and we also have contracts with vendors to help support our equipment, we do take this seriously, and we're bringing on a third-party engineering firm to come in and look at that, and I'll describe what their task is in a minute. Additionally, we also have a field experienced licensed resident who has numerous years experience in the HVAC field, who has graciously decided to partner with us and help us with this evaluation. So they will be assisting us in this evaluation as well too, so we can look at this from multiple angles. Robert, please, next slide. I want to give a brief overview of what our buildings are so people understand the terms that I'm using. The word univent sometimes is broken down into univent, and these are typically heaters that are placed on the outside wall of most of our classrooms. And when I say most, if you look at this diagram right here, you'll see Marshall Simons, Francis Wyman, Pine Glen, and Fox Hill, 4 of our schools have these univents. The primary function of these univents is to provide heat. These are not typically air conditioning units, these are heat units. These do have the capability to draw fresh air from outside, and most of these have independent functions from within the classroom. As I mentioned, most of these do not cool the air. Also, the outside air temperature does affect the inside air temperature. So for example, if it's 95 degrees outside and we are pulling 95-degree air in through this machine, that's going to be blowing 95 air in or hotter into the classroom. If the outside air is cold, we can heat that air and bring that heated air into the classroom. So again, we do rely on outside air, but it does affect the inside temperature.
Bob, just one thing, the unit has to be running in order for it to bring in outside air. If it's off, it's off?
If it's off, it's off. Just like if a window's closed, no air's coming in. If these units are off, they're closed and not performing any function at all.
Okay.
Again, these are slightly loud when operating because they are a fan and a mechanical unit. But again, typical classrooms are used to these. And like I said, these do have manual controls, so we have to operate these individually from the classroom and not from a master system. Next slide, please, Robert. So the next thing we talk about is rooftop air handling units. So Burlington High School and Memorial have these units. Some of you can't see this picture, but when you look at the slides later on, you'll see up on top of the high school, we have 11 of these units. And at Memorial, we have 5 of these units. These are capable of heat or air conditioning. These do draw fresh air from outside, similar to the other units we talked about. The difference is that these are larger central units, typically zoned closer to a hallway or something like that. And the air is carried from the roof through ductwork down to the classroom. The temperature is controlled typically in zones, so you don't have the granularity of per classroom or per office space adjusting temperature, more in areas. So you are lacking individual adjustability. Same as the last units, they are slightly loud when operating because they are blowing air, and the outside air temperature does affect the inside air temperature, meaning the extremes are difficult for us to control. When it's really, really hot or really, really cold, the times when the outside air temperature is close to the inside air temperature makes both of these units not necessarily beneficial to run. In the scenario we're looking at coming up on the return to school, the benefit would be to run these units as much as possible to bring in as much outside air, or again, to look at opening our windows and doors and using our fans in the classroom to help circulate and pull air in from outside. So Robert, next, please. So we mentioned an engineering firm to come in and assess all 6 of our buildings. What we were looking to have them do is come in and give a full, honest assessment of our systems. We want them to go to every single building. They're gonna look at every single classroom, every single one of our pieces of equipment that perform HVAC functions. They're gonna measure the airflow from those units to make sure that we're pulling in enough air or that the fans are circulating enough air as recommended that the machine is supposed to. We also wanna look at and inspect the unit functionality to make sure it's working as, again, supposed to, and verify that the machine is properly sized for the space that it's trying to either cool or heat. Additionally, we are we are bringing on in the next week or so an environmental engineering firm to test air quality. We'll be looking at what we consider to be the industry standard of 20 to 30% of the building will be sampled per time. We will look at that baseline sample prior to the start of school, and then weekly and or bi-weekly, depending on timing, results, and finances, obviously, to look at how long we continue these weekly or bi-weekly tests. But those materials, those answers, and those reports, we will make available once we have them. But again, these are something that we are scheduling, so we don't have these assessments or testing done yet.
A rough timeline, Bob?
We're looking at about a week for the start of the testing and about 2 weeks for the start of the engineering assessment. So we're looking at approximately 2 weeks and 3 weeks from now to when we have all of those results for the initial start going.
But prior to the start of school?
Prior to the start of school year is the baseline. So that's what we are attempting to do. Robert, if you can go to the next slide, please. So classroom distancing is definitely something that has been talked about in previous slides and shows and school committee meetings, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed in this particular readiness principle. If you look at what the words in front of you, we had looked at the typical 6-foot distancing of chairs, and we've looked at 5-foot, 4-foot, 3-foot examples as well too, and we've measured those in what we consider to be our typical classroom, which is approximately 900 square feet. So Robert, if we could go to the next slide. The next 2 slides, you're gonna see examples. These are our classrooms in our schools with our desks and our chairs. What 6 foot would look like in a typical 30 by 32 classroom. You can get 15 student desks with 15 student chairs and a teacher desk in there at 6 feet. If we go to the next slide, you will see at a 5-foot example, you would get 22 student chairs and 22 student desks, and then still a teacher desk in there. Sorry, I was going to say, depending on who's looking at these pictures, if we go back to the 6-foot one, I think the 6-foot one is definitely spaced further than what our classrooms are used to. I think the 5-foot distance examples are what most of our teachers are probably used to nowadays with what we would call, roughly standard spacing. But again, these are just examples.
And I also just want to stress, from the feasibility perspective, this was about measuring the square footage of classrooms, and there was a tool the state provided that calculated the number of desks and the recommended number of students that could fit. This is clearly not from a teacher perspective or from an educational perspective, saying that we can start the day with cardboard cutouts sitting 6 feet apart is sort of the answer that we were discussing, not with live kids and how to manage them, and that's obviously maintaining the 6-foot distancing is the real challenge once kids are there. But again, as a first step in feasibility, we just wanted to see how many students we could fit in our classrooms. We do know we may need to add classrooms. I think parents of Francis Wyman and Fox Hill know their 4th grade classes are slightly larger. And again, Burlington does support smaller class sizes, so we were sort of able to manage between the 5 and 6 foot distance examples. We are currently thinking about, we have posted for an additional 4th grade class both at Francis Wyman and at Fox Hill, and we're looking at other grades where we need to do that. Bob will talk about some additional spaces. The reason we are adding those sections is all about social distancing and all about maintaining that space. We're going to be surveying parents, and again, we'll get to this later as well. Once the school committee decides on the mode of education, we are going to be asking you whether you're going to send your child to school in person or want us to educate them remotely. So I can't tell you for sure we're going to add a section, because it's honestly going to depend how many 4th graders are coming in. And if enough are not coming in person, we may be able to achieve the social distancing without adding this section. But we are prepared to add sections to create maximum social distancing space.
Again, thanks, Dr. Conti. Robert, if you can go to the next slide. I was hoping we would use the next slide to discuss everything Dr. Conti just said, but he beat me to it, so thank you. Again, the exercise that was shown in the classroom distancing was really just an exercise of whether or not I knew how to use a tape measure, not really making an opinion or a judgment call as to which would be better for teaching and or at all, any way, shape, or form to sway the school committee's decision. But again, looking at what was presented before you, we definitely can exceed the recommended 3-foot physical distancing standards established by DESI, and especially in the 5 and 6 foot models, depending on the classrooms. We'll also talk about in the next readiness principle, vetting and identifying additional space. So that will further help us make sure that we can maintain social distancing. So Robert, if we can go to the next slide, please. So principle 5.2, again, is identifying and vetting additional space. These are the areas that Dr. Conti had just mentioned. So we're looking at gymnasiums, cafeterias, music classrooms, auditoriums, art rooms, and libraries. Typical spaces that would normally have larger groups in there. These are the spaces that we're looking at, either using storage for de-densified spaces such as the gymnasium, or seating areas that are using for flexible spaces like in the cafeteria or in the music or auditorium. These larger spaces still have limitations on the number of people that can be in the room, but they do provide us flexibility when we were to have, let's say, a classroom that exceeds 15 to 16 and we need to space out a little bit. We can look at a larger space like these areas and bring those classrooms and relocate them into there. So if we could move to the next one, Robert, please. So this slide is very boring, but the word is tents. Of course, depending on weather, we are looking at some flexible space, so we have acquired some tents that have already been delivered to the buildings. Anywhere from 3 to 5 tents are being delivered to these buildings to create some flexible outdoor space, whether it's for teachers to take breaks, whether it's for students to get outside and get some fresh air, but stay away from the sun. It's really just another way for us to say we have a space that we can provide education to, but if we can get outside and enjoy the fresh air, again, we're going to look at these flexible spaces.
So you said about how many again? Just concrete, 5?
3 to 5 right now, but we are looking at additional tents depending on the feedback that we receive from the schools on these.
All right, and they look like they're, what, 10 by 20 roughly?
A few different sizes, but 10 by 20. We've looked at some larger ones that we don't have yet, so if need be, we would look at those and continue to see if we can acquire them. But right now, 10 by 20, there's some 12 by 12 tents as well too, so.
And tents, I'm sure like everything else, are in high demand because restaurants are using them and everything else, so they're not as readily available as one would think, so.
It's a very true statement. I mean, last year, I'm sure we could have got all the hand sanitizer and tents and things like that we wanted, but right now, some of these are limited. So when we say that we're looking to acquire some things, even in future conversations we're gonna have tonight, some of that is really dependent on what supplies are available to us. So the things that we readily need, we're taking the quantities that are available, and then we're on wait list to get further equipment. So like I said, the tents, we're not necessarily on a wait list. We're really just trying to make sure that the initial feedback matches the use once they're put in place.
Right.
So, Robert, if we could go to the next one, please. So, principle 5.3 talks about de-densifying hallways and bathrooms. I would like to stress that I think there should be one more category in there as well too, and I should say maybe 2 more categories, classrooms and offices. But again, if we're just gonna look at de-densifying hallways and the bathrooms for right now, specifically this readiness principle is to look at hallway space and maximizing it. In an ideal recommendation from the guidelines for opening, you would look at one-way directional hallways if possible. If not bi-directional hallways, it's recommended to have a divider, whether that be tape on the floor, whether that be arrows, something to indicate flow of traffic, whether on the left or the right side of the hallway. Additionally, there's some other recommendations on what we can do to declutter or de-densify the hallways and the bathrooms. And again, these are just recommendations. These are something that will be, ongoing conversations that we'll have to look at. Something like consider rotating the teachers while the students remain in the classroom. Staggering bathroom breaks, limiting the number of people that can go into the bathrooms at one time. Possibly suspending the use of lockers. All of this means that we need to obviously inform the people in the building, the staff and the students of our intentions. So we're going to be looking at acquiring additional signage to the signage that we've already bought as well. Everything from 6-foot social distancing stickers to wear your mask stickers to sanitization stations are here stickers to again, dividers in the hallway and arrows in the hallway. So again, when you walk into a building, I think you'll be hit with a whole bunch of new signage. So we're going to take some time as well too to make sure that we get that guidance out as well.
And the use of the hallways isn't being directed by the central office. I think we're providing stickers to everyone, but because every building has its own design, the principals and the teachers in that building really know how the building works best. So we're just talking about sort of a general guideline for our principals then to try to indicate how that's going to work in their particular building. So Pine Glen hallway use, again, Mr. Lyons and his staff will say, can we have it one directional? How's it going to work? How is bathroom use going to work? How do we have students enter the building, exit the building? Those are really going to be school level based conversations, but we're trying to supply sort of a general guideline and all the materials, supplies and materials that principals would need to make that happen.
Great, thanks. Robert, if we can go to the next slide. So again, the conversations are not over on that previous principle, but for tonight's conversation, we're going to move into Principle 8, which is the next one that I'm facilitating. So Principle 8 is hygiene and personal space. Again, a quick overview is 3 categories. 8.1 is hand washing and sanitizing. 8.2 is effective sanitization. And 8.3 is minimize and proper sanitization of shared use and high-touch supplies. So again, we're going to talk more about those in a second, but Robert, please. So Principle 8.1, hand washing and sanitizing. Again, the principles right now are to look at scheduling hand washing and or sanitizing throughout the day. Most of our classrooms, especially at the elementary level, have classroom sinks in addition to the bathrooms in the hallways. At the high school and middle school level, we don't have the same number of sinks in the bathroom. Sinks in the classrooms. So we will be looking to obviously within that building make some decisions on to scheduling hand washing breaks. But it does bring us to our next point. We'll be placing hand sanitizer in key locations throughout the building, but also distributing again throughout the entire building. So when we say place hand sanitizer in key locations, main entrances, main points in the hallway, tops and bottom of stairs, what we're calling common areas or high traffic areas, you're going to see hand sanitizing stations. In the classrooms and or teaching spaces, you'll see more individualized, teacher-based hand sanitizing pumps and so forth. So again, a combination of hand sanitizers and hand washing throughout the day is the best. So we will need to train and educate our staff and the students. And again, a lot of these decisions will be more at the building base, but overall, we're still going to have the same vision to make sure that our hands are clean as you come into the building. Your hands are either clean or sanitized before you eat something, before and after you go to the bathroom, and before you leave at the end of the day, and then various thrown in depending on the classroom as needed. Another thing that we need to do and that the teachers will have to help us with is to promote the use of waving or thumbs up or smiles when masks are not on, instead of handshaking and hugs and physical contact as well too. So you'll see my little symbol of a guy waving and smiling. I hope we see a lot of that moving forward when students return. So Robert, next slide please. So 8.2, effective sanitization. So we need to define roles for cleaning and designate the areas who will be cleaning. I do want to stress that all of us have a role in maintaining a clean building. While we do have dedicated personnel, our custodial staff who does a great job of keeping our buildings clean, there's definitely going to be some needed assistance on the cleaning of the personal workspace. direct use items such as, you know, around their desk, their assigned device, their keyboards, their pens, and so forth that the teachers are using. You know, as they continue to use them, maybe a little bit wiped down would definitely help out our custodians as well too. Our custodian's going to target on the bigger areas, and then the communication with the teachers will work out the fine details of what's dirty and what needs to be disinfected and so forth. Spray bottles of disinfectant are provided throughout the building. I'm unaware of a classroom right now that does not have access to spray bottles and paper towels, but if there is some, we will gladly get that to all of our staff. And the reason for the spray bottles is that we have limited amounts of the pre-Morrison wipes. And again, as discussed earlier, these are really just not available, especially in the quantities that we would need. So while we do have some, we will distribute those to the buildings, but we have a larger supply of dry paper towels and spray bottles with cleaning solution that is EPA approved. So we obviously want to take advantage of that to make sure we have clean spaces. So Robert, next one, please. Deep cleaning is a word that I hear that gets thrown around a lot. I just wanted to take tonight to maybe address that a little bit. Every day is a deep cleaning day for us. So we don't deep clean a chair or deep clean a table on a certain day. We would clean it every single day. We don't deep clean light switches and door handles. We would clean that every single day, multiple times a day. Some of the scenarios that possibly could happen would be as on an extended day. We may look at a deeper cleaning, washing the floors with a different process than we would do during the week when time is a little bit restricted. Or we may look for surfaces that are not high contact or heavily trafficked areas and get into those areas and a little bit cleaner. So we may expand our cleaning realm, but I don't want people believing that we clean differently or use different products to clean at different times of the day. We'll be using EPA approved cleaning all the time. And then like I said, when time permits, we'll just expand our realm of what we're able to clean on those days and times. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
No, I was going to say, because in some of the schedules people see, Wednesdays is sort of they call it a deep cleaning day, and that might be a day that you get to other areas that you're not able to get to when kids are in the building. We might need to flex some of the custodial shifts to make sure people are maybe working later if they need to. But we're also being told that letting the building sort of not have students in it, especially at the middle school and high school, is primarily what we're talking about. For 24 hours helps everything settle too, and then the regular cleaning that happens can be more effective. So, so again, I think again that word deep cleaning gets thrown around, and I'm thank you for saying that it's sort of we deep clean all the time. But I bet that's going to come up again. So
sure, great. So the next principle is 8.3, which is the limit and sanitize share items. The intent of this is to really ensure that each student has their own supplies. We also look to limit the use of shared items. If there are shared items, we look to sanitize those items frequently or at least place them aside. And there are certain instances where we would need to consider quarantine a share item that cannot be sanitized. And that may be something like a book, like a paperback book. Let's say a student was to look at that or take that out for a week and then want to return that. That's not necessarily something we can sanitize right away. So we may look to put that into, let's say, a decompression box or a box that's aside and it's not on the regular shelf, and give that time to breathe. And then a week or two from now, we would look to put that book back in circulation. That's just an example. It's definitely not something that we've committed to. It's just, again, some of the recommendations that we're looking at. So if we could go to the next slide, please. The last principle that I'm facilitating is principle 9, and this has to do with density and distance. A lot of these principles, as you'll see in some of my slides, are ongoing conversations and are really developing right now. With school potentially starting in a few weeks, we do have a lot of work ahead of us, but these are, like I said, ongoing conversations with the building principals, with the superintendent, with the bus company, with staff, parents. There's just a lot. So even in tonight's readiness principles meeting, we'll be reviewing these protocols as well too, but we'll still have to continue these conversations at the school level.
Right, so we don't, we're probably gonna have a separate night just for transportation. We don't have that fully, plan fully developed yet. We actually, again, got the guidelines, we explained that to folks. And then the drop-off and pickup of students, again, is really gonna be a building-based conversation. And I know principals have been meeting with our safety officers and looking at some different ways to do that. We're expecting higher parent traffic, higher car traffic, less use of buses, so we're trying to plan for that and maybe change some of the drop-off pickups that people have become used to. So again, we will get to all that as we move forward. So,
right, so the next few slides I'm going to go through a little bit briefer, but if we can, Robert, go to the next one, 9.1. So 9.1 talks about developing a protocol for distance on buses. There's 2 points, and then I want to go to a picture. So again, on a future meeting, we will be discussing this here, but we'll also be having many future meetings in my office discussing this. And like I said, continued school-based conversations going on. The picture that is in front of you, or that you'll see when you look at this presentation later on, is the recommendation for a bus. This was provided as guidance, and what this looks like, every place you see a red dot is where a student would be. So a typical 77 passenger bus has 25 seats on it, plus a driver's seat. And then what you would do is say every other seat, you would go all the way inside, outside, inside, outside. So you would have, let's say, 25 students on a 77 passenger bus, 21 students on a 71 passenger bus, and of course, as the bus gets smaller, less students. We range from 71 to 77 passenger bus, which means we'd be looking at somewhere in the capacity of 21 to 25 students on the bus at the given guidance.
And for many districts that don't provide transportation or have limited transportation, I think the drop-off isn't going to feel as far. I think because Burlington has provided a seat for every student, it's going to be almost harder for us to limit transportation. But so one of our principles, we were clear from the very beginning, we are not going to be able to maintain the level of transportation service that we were providing prior to the pandemic. So I don't exactly know how we're going to limit it. I think in our parent survey, we're going to be asking whether you desperately need transportation, whether you can sort of get by without transportation, or whether you don't want to use transportation at all. And we may need to reroute buses, and I think it's going to certainly be an important area of concern in the coming weeks. So, Robert, next slide, please.
Yep. And to piggyback on that, 9.2 is to develop a protocol for distancing on buses. Again, these were provided for us in the guidance from the state, but again, that's guidance that we are still reviewing. We are also working with the bus company to look at their interpretation of the guidance as well too, and looking for plans that is going to benefit Burlington parents and Burlington students. But we don't have that decisions made yet. So again, these will also be in further meetings and further discussions and further school-based conversations that are ongoing. So Robert, if we could look at 9.3. So 9.3 is for us to develop a plan for staggering drop-off and pickup of students. This one is in particular based off of busing and or the number of parents that potentially may be driving their students to school, either on their own will or due to lack of transportation busing. We need to figure out how we can get them all in and out at the same time without having a line down the street and blocking traffic. Not only that, we need to make sure we can provide safe entrances in and out of our building for staff and students. So I've been meeting with principals and public safety officer, Dominic Rossi. When we've been discussing these, we've been looking at safe routes for walking to school. We've been looking at alternate routes of either picking up and dropping off students in cars and potentially even rerouting some of the buses to drop off either at various doors or various sides of the school. Again, right now, these are scenarios that we have not finalized. So again, I'm going to repeat myself that ongoing conversations, and we will try to get to those soon.
Right, but Bob, the state regulations are that we need to provide transportation for students outside of a 2-mile radius of a school.
That is correct.
And so we currently provide transportation, we don't really even have a radius, correct?
We don't set a 2-mile radius, no.
So, so again, just for parent thinking, we may need to look at a 1.5 mile or 2-mile radius outside of a school, and then say sort of anyone inside of that radius may need to walk or ride a bike or get to school some other way than a bus, just to limit the number of students. But we have to look at all these models. Again, I'm not saying that was a decision, but again, Burlington provides a much higher level of transportation service than we are required to by state regulation. Robert, next slide, please.
So this is similar to a previous principle as well too, but we are evaluating classes that require modification due to higher risk or other activities. So this may be something potentially as in gym class and or music, and so we are looking at those spaces and looking to see if there's ways that we can teach those classes effective and safely, also for the staff as well as the students. If not, we're looking to reevaluate where we can use those spaces in the building.
Yeah, and I think we have very creative teachers who will adjust their curriculum, and again, this level of conversation is more about the operational and the physical needs of that space. So we're really not supposed to be having gym inside, singing inside, or musical instruments that you blow into inside, string instruments and other things. We can have, I think we can have some of those classes outside as long as the weather is good, and I think they're saying up to 10 feet of space or something between the participants. So again, we're going to look at this operationally, and then I think instructionally as well. So I just want to make sure that we'll involve obviously the people who have the instructional knowledge on the instructional side. We are committed to providing specials to students and maintaining those specials. They just may look different starting in the fall. Robert, next slide, please.
So this is the last principle that I'm facilitating, but this is 9.5, to create a protocol for meals that allow for 6-foot distancing. Again, ongoing conversations. This one, we're looking at phasing it in. We are potentially discussing a middle school pilot to start the year, and then looking to phase in or introduce slowly at other schools. We obviously recognize that students need to eat, but we need to figure out how we can provide them in a safe place and distance them far enough away from each other to allow them to remove their masks while still consuming lunches and so forth in our classes and or in our spaces. So.
Right, and then some of the feedback, and we'll continue to work through this. If kids can have snacks, why can't they eat lunch? And I think it's a bit of a different conversation, even though I understand the logic. If, especially at the elementary level, our initial plan is to send students home for lunch. That doesn't mean that's how it's going to happen all year. I think we would need to get our cafeteria staff trained in that, and we also have to monitor the kids if they eat in their classrooms. And then some of the things that Bob was talking to me about is making sure we can get the trash out of all the classrooms. We may need larger barrels. There's sort of very granular things that we may need to think about. And obviously at all schools we're going to have to provide lunches, probably grab-and-go lunches for the food insecure, and we might actually expand that based on some of the federal reimbursements that are available. Again, and continue to work with the Burlington Food Pantry, who've been fantastic partners in getting our students who are food insecure meals during the school closure. So again, I just, like many other things that we're going to be discussing, we may be phasing in lunch over time. Where we start isn't going to be where we end up. But if we do things carefully and well, the odds of keeping the buildings open longer increase. So I know some of it may be frustrating, but if we try to do too many things too quickly, I think a false start means that the buildings may need to be shut down. So I think we're trying to do this as carefully and as well thought out a manner as possible. Robert, next slide. I want to leave some time for questions. Again, district update, state and local metrics. I want to just briefly talk about remote learning, as I said, and defining learning models. That's going to be something that we talk about next Thursday as well. Next slide, Robert. Had this slide. Again, it's a picture, but the WHO, what we keep asking the state for are metrics because I'm not qualified to make those decisions. It's a little bit difficult if every community, every school district through their Board of Health has a different metric or measurement as to when schools can be open, when schools can be closed. We're hoping in the next week or so the state does release metrics. Connecticut has done so, and we're hoping Massachusetts follows suit. All the New England states, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, are planning on allowing students to return to their schools. So it seems to be the sort of 5% positivity seems to be the line that the WHO says you need to be below even to consider opening schools. And the big arrow there points to where Massachusetts is. I think we were around 1%. I think recently we had a bit of a spike, and we might be sitting about 2%, which is why they're talking about doing some changes in the phasing. And the changing in the phasing are really meant to allow for schools to open. Burlington as a community sits at 0.62 or 0.63. Again, I look at the globe pretty much daily to look at the daily ticker, and so I'll say 0.63 just to be a little bit more conservative. So again, if the WHO says we should be exploring in-person education at 5% or below, we are below 1% as a community. We are at 0.62 or 0.63. I think that's a credit to the people in the community. They're taking this seriously. They're taking their home protocol seriously, and we're just asking that that continue. The lower that percentage stays, the more likely it is that we'll be there. So that's where we're talking about positivity levels. The next slide, please, Robert. The Remote Learning Foundation, I just want to define remote learning because people are using that term. The feedback that I got from my particular group is as soon as we say remote learning, people are thinking of the experience they had in the spring. The fall remote learning is going to be very different than what people experienced in the spring. Remote learning is any learning that takes place outside of the school buildings, sort of as a generic term. And again, the experience people are going to be having in remote learning in the fall is going to be very different, and I'll explain that in 1 second. We often use the term synchronous versus asynchronous. Again, you'll be hearing about this more next Thursday, but synchronous is when a teacher is on a computer live teaching children on the other side of the computer. So it would be like a Zoom meeting where people are interacting. That is a synchronous lesson. Or a Google Meet where both people are live. And asynchronous would be instruction that is pre-recorded that can happen anytime or any place. And there are some very effective asynchronous instructions as well. And some people like the asynchronous because it allows for a lot of flexibility as to when you can access it. But the synchronous allows for more consistency. Some suggestions were for us to limit our platforms and to provide training on those platforms. And again, next Thursday, we are going to discuss what our platforms are. We're using Seesaw at the elementary level and Google Classroom at the middle and high school level. And beginning, again, next week, we'll explain how we're going to provide training for our faculty in those two. And many teachers have been undergoing that training all summer already on their own. But we'll also be providing training for families if they want to see how we use those two tools. One of the points we wanted to stress, which is why it is in red, is that the whole point of our design, which I think really evolved from the principals and the teacher working teams, which I think is just a very smart thing, is if you look across all levels, the hybrid and remote schedules will be the same, whether the students are learning in person or at home. So if you're an elementary parent and you're looking at the schedule of the day, 5 days a week where students get a literacy block, a specialist block, a math block, and sort of that structure of the day that starts at 8:30, 8:30, and goes to, let's say, 11 or 11:30, if the students are in school, they're going to progress through that sequence. If we have to shut down the buildings, then we're expecting that in a synchronous manner, teachers would be teaching using that same schedule. So whether students are at home, in a full remote or in hybrid, the schedules will be the same. For those students who are completely remote, we have to work through what that's still going to look like. But one of the options the state is providing are learning management systems and new options. And again, next Thursday, we'll go through those options from the state, or DESE, which is Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Those came out basically, I think they came out yesterday, some of those options. And we'll be exploring those options and sharing those options. And those are meant for students who do not return to in-person school, and maybe a way for us to enhance the delivery of some sort of content that we're not controlling. So the next slide, again, is just to stress, again, the whole point of our hybrid proposal to the school committee is that our hybrid schedule and our remote schedules would be the same, again, whether students are learning in person or at home. So if we're forced to shut our buildings down, that the structure, the schedule, the consistency would remain the same. Again, whether the students return to school or whether they're at home. Robert, next slide. Again, some of our next steps. Our district working groups are going to continue to meet. In fact, we have a meeting right after we're off the air tonight, and those are the 5 groups that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. If anyone said, boy, I missed that I could be on those, please send me an email or send an email to the 2020 school opening email account, and we will put you on a group. Those groups are going to continue to meet even after the school committee decides on Monday. Again, Monday, August 10th, we have a school committee meeting. That's at 7 o'clock. We'll be presenting our recommendations for the fall. I do want to stress that even if the school committee votes August 10th, things with the virus are changing so quickly that I'm sure they will revisit that decision every week prior to the opening of school. So even, let's say, they decide or they make a positive vote for a hybrid return, they'll be revisiting that vote every week. And if the virus spikes or something changes, they could change that vote to, for instance, a fully remote before the start of school. So it's really going to be the virus that drives what we do. But as we stated from the slide of Massachusetts as a whole and as Burlington as a community, it looks like the percent positivity is low enough where we can explore an in-person return. And so that's what we've been doing through our feasibility studies. Again, August 13th, next Thursday, I'll be joined by Dennis Villano. We're going to be talking about educational technology and remote learning specifically, talk about what it is that we're going to be doing, how it's different from what parents experienced in the spring. And then our plans, again, the decision by the school committee is August 10th, and then we have to submit our full plan documents to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education by Friday, August 14th. And so that's coming up a week from this Friday. And again, that's when we'll be saying moving forward. But again, I know the school committee, however they vote, is going to reserve the right to change that vote depending on how the virus spreads and what the scientists say and guidance from the Board of Health. We will be sharing our plan with the Board of Health as soon as the school committee votes and we have a plan. And as soon as we put those documents together, we'll be asking for feedback from the Burlington Board of Health as well. So they'll be involved in our planning and in our documents, and they've been involved all along with our protocols. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank them and Susan Luminello for all the support that they've provided for us, and they will continue to provide for us. We wanted to leave, Robert, next slide. Yeah, we wanted to leave some time for questions, but I did get Patrick. He said he was off Facebook, and he said the tone of the questions and comments was a little bit difficult tonight. So I know these are anxious and stressful times. I know social media isn't always the best to have a dialogue. And I actually know going into this that we're not going to please everyone, or potentially even anyone, with the choices that we make. I just please ask for your patience, your flexibility, and as a community, we're going to have challenging conversations, and I really want those conversations to happen as respectfully as possible. We are all doing our best. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. We're trying to share information as much as we can, and there are strong opinions on either side, and I respect that and understand that. And we know our teachers want to be back in their classrooms with their students. We know parents want their children to be back in school. Nothing replaces that in-school experience and the relationships that our teachers have been able to form with their students. We all want to get back there as quickly as we can. We're just trying to do this in as safe a manner as possible. And even if we can't return, the remote experience that we're going to create is going to be much different than parents experienced in the spring, and be of much higher quality. So that's our commitment, and we will be posting, I think, by tomorrow, the frequently asked questions. We don't have all of them done. I think we have well over 150 or so at this point. We're trying to group them just so they make sense, and we'll be posting those tomorrow prior to the weekend. And as Bob said, as soon as we get the results back from our HVAC analysis and our air quality, we'll be posting those metrics as well, and we'll be trying to move forward as we can. The work has been ongoing, but a lot of the work we still have to do, and that'll be driven by the school committee decision on Monday night. And then again, we look forward to trying to bring students back as much as we can to in-person learning as safely as we can for both the students and staff. And then we'll be looking to phase in more and more of an in-person experience as we get better at managing the space, the students, social distancing, as we have new routines. What parents can be doing now is practicing those skills, having students wear masks, keeping their masks on. Wearing masks is really going to be a key for keeping everybody safe moving forward, and that's really what we can do. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to be joined by Barbara Conley, our nurse leader, and she's going to be going through some of our safety protocols, and then some of what parents need to do in terms of temperature checks and screening their children before allowing them to come to school. So with that, again, thank you for spending another Thursday night with us. We know this is a far cry from must-see TV. It'll be recorded if you need to view it another time. We'll also post the slideshow on our website, and we look forward to answering your questions as they come in and as they evolve, and hoping the dialogue remains respectful, and hoping that we can provide quality education in the fall. Thank you.